Ignored by everyone inside a large company, a humble young man carries a talent that could be worth millions, but no one is prepared to find out where he came from. The sun was just rising on the horizon when Martha Reynolds walked through the glass doors of Tech Vista Corp, one of the most promising tech companies in Austin. It was 6:30 in the morning, a time when the city was still slowly awakening, but for her, it already marked the beginning of another workday. She adjusted her light blue uniform and tied her graying hair with a discreet hairnet. At 48, her face carried the marks of a life that had never been easy, but her eyes still maintained a gleam of determination. The receptionist, who had just arrived, nodded without really looking at Martha. It was like this every day, automatic greetings, glances that passed over her as if she were part of the decoration. Martha returned the gesture and continued to the supply closet. There she prepared her cart with cleaning products, cloths, brooms, and everything she would need to keep the company's 3 floors impeccable. "The boss is in a foul mood today," commented Josephine, another cleaning staff member, while gathering supplies. "Losing that contract with the New Yorkers really wounded his ego." Martha simply nodded. Edward Brandon, CEO of Tech Vista Corp, was known for his fits of irritation when things didn't go as planned. In the 2 years she had worked there, she had witnessed many crises, many dismissals, and many tears shed in the company bathrooms. "I'll start with the 3rd floor today. The executive meetings are early," Martha replied, pushing her cart toward the service elevator. The routine began as always, cleaning bathrooms, emptying trash cans, wiping desks, polishing glass. Her hands worked automatically, while her mind wandered to the worries she carried. The overdue electric bill, the rent that would increase next month, and above all, anxiety about the future of Logan, her oldest son. Logan had recently turned 18. He was a brilliant boy, always with a book under his arm and questions she couldn't always answer. From a young age, he had demonstrated an impressive ease for learning languages, a fascination that began when a teacher at the public school recognized his talent and lent him linguistics books. Over time, what was curiosity transformed into passion. The boy studied on his own with limited resources, but with a dedication that would impress anyone, if anyone bothered to notice. "Mrs. Reynolds?" The voice pulled her from her thoughts. It was Amanda, a young marketing intern, one of the few people who addressed her by name. "Good morning, dear," Martha replied with a discreet smile. "I just wanted to let you know I spilled coffee near my desk. I tried to clean it, but don't worry, I'll take care of it." Martha appreciated that small gesture of consideration. Amanda could have simply left the stain for her to discover later, as so many others did. These small moments of humanity made the days more bearable. While cleaning the carpet near Amanda's desk, the office buzz increased considerably. Edward Brandon had arrived, and everyone seemed to adjust their posture, their voices, even the rhythm of their typing. The 45-year-old man, tall, always impeccably dressed in Italian suits, emanated an authority that seemed to fill the entire space. "I want all the Next Tech reports on my desk in half an hour," his voice echoed across the floor. "And someone explained to me how we lost that contract to a company that didn't even exist 2 years ago." Martha instinctively shrank, becoming even more invisible. She had learned that on days like this, it was best not to draw attention. She continued her work, moving silently between desks, collecting abandoned cups and organizing what she could without disturbing anyone. At home, the situation wasn't much different from work. Martha was also the silent pillar that kept everything functioning. Since Anthony, her husband, lost his job at the metalworks 3 years ago, he had sunk into a state of discouragement that made him practically absent. He spent his days looking for work without success, returning increasingly frustrated, increasingly distant. Logan and Frank, her 15-year-old younger son, felt the weight of that atmosphere. Frank reacted with rebellion, questioning why they couldn't have the same things as his school friends. Logan, more sensitive to the situation, tried to be as unproblematic as possible. He studied at the public library to save electricity, accompanied his mother to work when the home internet was cut off, and helped with household chores without anyone having to ask. That morning, before leaving home, Logan had shown Martha a certificate he had received from the online language course he was taking with a partial scholarship. "I got the highest grade in Hungarian, Mom," he had said with a contained smile. "The teacher said I have a facility with Eastern European languages." Martha had hugged her son with pride, even without fully understanding the value of that achievement. For her, what mattered was seeing the happiness in his eyes, even if it was for something she barely comprehended. "You are the pride of my life," she had said, adjusting the collar of his shirt, frayed at the edges but always clean and pressed. Now, as she cleaned the windows of Edward's office, she observed the city outside. The imposing buildings of downtown Austin contrasting with the distant hills that surrounded the Texas capital. How many stories like hers existed in that landscape? How many Marthas, invisible but essential, ensuring that the world of the visible continued functioning? The thought was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. Edward Brandon was walking in her direction, phone to his ear, gesturing nervously. "I don't care what the problem is. I want those investors on the video conference tomorrow," he vociferated into the device. Martha tried to move her cleaning cart to make way, but she wasn't fast enough. Edward bumped into the cart, causing some products to lose balance. "Can't you see I'm walking here?" he snapped, moving the phone away for a moment. "Is it too much to ask that you know how to occupy space properly?" The words hit Martha like a slap. She mumbled an apology, lowering her eyes as she had learned to do in such situations. Edward continued on his way, without even registering the impact of his words, immediately resuming the call as if the incident hadn't happened. It was at this moment that Martha's cell phone vibrated in her uniform pocket. It was a message from Logan. "Mum, I managed to leave the library early today. I'll pick you up at work. I'm bringing that cornbread you like." A small smile crossed her lips. Amid so much invisibility, it was comforting to know that, for someone in the world, she was the most important person that existed. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. The afternoon was progressing at Tech Vista Corp when receptionist Patricia caught everyone's attention with an unusual announcement. "International correspondence has arrived for Mr. Brandon," she said, holding a large, bulky envelope with foreign stamps and official markings. "It looks important." Some employees raised their heads, curious. Physical mail was a rarity in that company where everything happened digitally. Edward, who was passing through the lobby at that moment, stopped and frowned. "For me, directly for me?" he asked, extending his hand for the envelope. Patricia nodded, handing him the document. "It came by International Express service. I had to sign a special receipt." Edward examined the envelope with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. It was made of thick paper, almost parchment, sealed with an official wax seal and covered with stamps and seals he had never seen before. The address was printed in golden letters, and his full name, Edward Henry Brandon, was written in perfect calligraphy. "Must be another one of those international conferences wanting sponsorship," he muttered, heading for his office, "or some creative marketing strategy." On the way, he passed Martha, who was carefully polishing the railing of the main staircase. As usual, he didn't notice her. His focus was on the mysterious envelope and what it might represent. Perhaps an opportunity to recover the prestige lost with the New York contract. Or was it just more unimportant correspondence, the kind that arrived by the dozens? Upon reaching his office, he called Renee, his executive assistant, and asked her to gather the directors for an impromptu meeting. "It could be something about that European tender," he commented, as he tore open the envelope with a mixture of anxiety and impatience. The contents, however, were completely different from what he expected. Inside were about 20 pages, bound with a hard, elegant cover. The pages were filled with text in a totally unknown language, with symbols and characters that seemed to come from another world. "What the hell is this?" exclaimed Edward, leafing through the pages with growing frustration. "What language is this?" Renee took one of the pages and examined it carefully. "It doesn't look like any common language. It's not German or French or Russian." In a few minutes, the meeting room was full. Tech Vista Corp's directors and managers crowded around the table, all equally intrigued by the mysterious document. Attempts to use online translation apps were quickly frustrated. The phone cameras couldn't properly process the characters, and the few sections that were recognized resulted in nonsensical translations. "This must be some kind of joke," said Claude, the commercial director, "or a very strange marketing strategy." Vanessa, the financial director, disagreed. "I don't know. It has a very official air. Look at the stamps, the seals, the quality of the paper." Edward, now impatient, flipped through the pages with growing irritation. "I don't have time for riddles. We're in the middle of a crisis after losing the New York contract, and now this?" The tension in the room increased as everyone felt more and more frustrated with the mystery. It was then that Edward, in a fit of irritation, stood up and exclaimed, "This can only be some international legal spam or a very elaborate scam. Frankly, if anyone translates this garbage, I'll give them my month's salary." Some laughed nervously, others looked at each other in silence. Edward wasn't known for making jokes, especially involving money. His monthly salary was the subject of speculation among employees. Rumors suggested 6 figures, something unimaginable for most of them. "Seriously, people," he continued, throwing the papers on the table, "I want to find out what this is before the end of the day. Hire a translator, do whatever it takes." While the meeting continued on the upper floor in the lobby, Logan Reynolds had just arrived. As he had promised his mother, he had left the public library where he usually studied early to pick her up from work. He wore simple jeans, a faded t-shirt, and carried a worn backpack with his books and notebooks. In a plastic bag, the cornbread he had bought to brighten his mother's late afternoon. "Good afternoon, can I help you with something?" asked Patricia, the receptionist, in a tone that mixed politeness and suspicion. It wasn't common for young people like him to visit the building. "I'm waiting for my mother, Martha Reynolds. She works in cleaning," replied Logan in a low but firm voice. "We arranged that I would wait for her here." Patricia nodded, indicating the lobby sofa. "You can wait there. She must be on one of the upper floors." Logan thanked her and sat down, taking a worn book on comparative linguistics from his backpack. He used to take advantage of every free minute to study. It was his way of escaping the harsh reality, of dreaming of possibilities beyond the peripheral neighborhood where he lived, beyond the financial limitations that surrounded him. The peace of reading was interrupted by excited voices coming from the staircase. Employees were descending, animatedly discussing something that seemed to have stirred up the corporate environment. "It's some kind of code. It has to be," one of them was saying. "I've never seen anything like it." "It looked like Russian, but it's not Russian," commented another. "Edward is freaking out up there, said he'd give his salary to whoever could translate it." Logan raised his eyes from the book, intrigued. He had always been fascinated by languages and codes. Since childhood, he had invented secret languages to communicate with the few friends he had. In adolescence, this interest transformed into serious study when he discovered his natural talent for learning languages. With few resources but much dedication, he had learned English, Spanish, and in the last 2 years, had immersed himself in the study of less common languages, especially those from Eastern Europe. His curiosity increased when he saw Vanessa, the financial director, come down with some sheets in her hands, still trying to decipher the symbols printed on them. For a moment, Logan caught a glimpse of one of the pages. The shock was immediate. He instantly recognized the characters, the structure of the sentences, the grammatical peculiarities. It was Hungarian, without a doubt. And not just everyday Hungarian, but what appeared to be a formal document, with legal terminology. His heart raced. After months of studying the language through an online course he had managed to get with a partial scholarship, he felt capable of understanding at least the basics of that text. The desire to offer help was almost irresistible, but something held him back. The fear of ridicule, shyness, the acute awareness of his social position, the janitor's son, wearing simple clothes, without any official credentials. At this moment, his mother appeared from the side corridor. Martha smiled when she saw her son, her tired face immediately lighting up. "You really came," she said, approaching. "You didn't have to, son." Logan hugged her briefly. "I brought cornbread," he whispered, showing the bag. Martha noticed the unusual agitation in the lobby. "What's happening? Everyone's talking at once." Logan explained what he had heard about the mysterious document and the CEO's promise. As he spoke, his eyes shone with a mixture of excitement and hesitation. I think I know what language it is," he finally confessed in a low voice. "From what I saw, it looks like Hungarian. I've been studying it for a few months, remember?" Martha's face registered surprise first, then concern. She knew that corporate environment well and how people like them were treated. "Don't even think about it, Logan. They'll laugh at you." "But Mom, what if it's important? If no one else can read it?" Martha gripped her son's arm firmly. "Logan, these people, they won't believe you. It's not worth the humiliation." Their dialogue was interrupted by Edward's thunderous arrival in the lobby, followed by a retinue of directors and managers. They were all still discussing the enigmatic document, now with more frustration than curiosity. "Patricia, call that translation company we used for the Asia project. Tell them it's urgent," ordered Edward, passing through the lobby toward the exit. It was at this moment that his eyes crossed with Logan's. For a brief instant, something indefinable passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, or simply Edward's curiosity at seeing an unknown young man in his company's lobby. "Who are you?" he asked abruptly. Logan felt all eyes turn to him. A sudden silence took over the environment. Martha took a step forward, placing herself partially between her son and the boss. "It's my son, Mr. Brandon. He came to pick me up today." Edward nodded distractedly, already turning his gaze to his cell phone where he was impatiently checking messages. He was about to continue on his way when Logan, in an impulse that later even he wouldn't be able to explain, took a step forward. "Sir, I might be able to help with the document." The words came out almost as a whisper, but in the silence that had settled, they were perfectly audible. Edward turned slowly, an expression of disbelief and slight amusement forming on his face. "You said you can help?" he asked, his tone oscillating between incredulity and condescension. "With a document in a language that no one here has been able to identify?" Logan swallowed hard, feeling his mother's gaze fixed on him, silently begging him to back down. But something inside him refused to stay quiet. Perhaps it was wounded pride, or the desire to be seen, really seen, at least once. "Yes, sir," he replied, his voice gaining firmness. "I believe it's Hungarian, and I study Hungarian." A dense silence took over the lobby of Tech Vista Corp. All eyes were fixed on Logan, the thin young man who had just claimed he could solve the mystery that confused the entire company's management. Edward's expression oscillated between incredulity and amusement, while executives exchanged skeptical or amused glances. "Hungarian," repeated Edward, raising his eyebrows. "And you, by any chance, speak Hungarian?" Before Logan could respond, one of the marketing interns let out a mocking laugh. "Only if it's Hungarian from Round Rock," he commented quietly, provoking contained laughter from some colleagues. Martha stepped forward, her face burning with shame and indignation. "Let's go, Logan. It's time for me to leave anyway." But Logan remained firm, his eyes fixed on Edward's. There was something in that moment, a chance, perhaps the only one, to show his worth in a world that had always ignored him. "Yes, sir," he replied with a calmness that surprised even himself. "I've been studying Hungarian for almost 2 years. I participated in an online program from the University of Budapest for foreign students." Edward narrowed his eyes, studying the young man with renewed attention. He hadn't expected such a specific and confident response. For a moment, everyone seemed suspended in a bubble of uncertainty. "Well, that's interesting," Edward finally said, his tone still skeptical. "And why exactly did you decide to study Hungarian? It's not exactly the most useful language in the market." The question carried a hint of condescension, but Logan wasn't intimidated. Years of passion for languages had given him a rare confidence when the subject was linguistics. "I started studying Polish, then became interested in Finno-Ugric languages," he explained. "Hungarian has a fascinating structure, completely different from Latin or Germanic languages. It's an intellectual challenge that—" "Spare us the lecture," interrupted Edward with an impatient gesture. "Do you really think you can translate a formal legal document?" Logan hesitated for a second. "I can try, sir. If it is indeed Hungarian, I believe I can at least understand the main content." A tense silence followed this statement. Edward seemed to weigh his options, clearly divided between incredulity and the urgent need to decipher the mysterious document. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, he made a gesture to Vanessa. "Show him a page," he ordered. "Let's see if he can at least correctly identify the language." Vanessa extended one of the sheets to Logan, who took it carefully. His eyes quickly scanned the text, recognizing structures, deciphering words, assimilating the context. To everyone's surprise, his face lit up with what could only be described as genuine recognition. "It is Hungarian, yes," he confirmed, nodding. "And from what I can see, it's an official legal document. These markings here are typical of Hungarian government correspondence." The confidence with which he spoke began to dissipate the initial skepticism. Edward made a gesture for everyone to head to the first-floor meeting room. "Let's test this theory," he said, walking toward the elevator. Then, turning to Logan, he added, You have 30 minutes to impress me, young man. After that, we go back to the original plan. Martha touched her son's arm, her face a mask of concern. Are you sure about this? You don't need to prove anything to these people. Logan smiled at his mother, a smile that mixed determination and tenderness. I know, Mom, but I want to do this. For myself. In the meeting room, the contrast couldn't be more evident. On one side of the long mahogany table, executives in formal attire, expensive watches and distrustful expressions. On the other, Logan, in his simple t-shirt and faded jeans, with Martha standing in a corner of the room, her cleaning uniform creating a visual dissonance with the sophisticated environment. Edward placed the complete document on the table. Here it is. If you really can translate this, we'll consider your ability. Logan took the pages and asked for a notebook to make notes. Vanessa offered him a company notepad and a pen. With surprising methodology, he began to examine the document, page by page, making quick notes. Occasionally consulting an app on his old and worn cell phone, the minutes passed in tense silence. Some executives checked their watches or cell phones, clearly skeptical about the outcome of that improbable exercise. Edward drummed his fingers on the table, divided between impatience and growing curiosity. After about 20 minutes, Logan raised his head. His face had changed. He was no longer just the timid son of the cleaning lady, but a young man with knowledge and purpose. Mr. Brandon, he began, his voice firm, this document comes from a law office in Budapest, the capital of Hungary. From what I understand, they're trying to locate an heir for a significant fortune. Interest in the room visibly increased. Edward leaned forward. Continue. The document explains that a man named Endre Kovac died 6 months ago without leaving direct heirs. He was a Hungarian businessman who made a fortune in real estate. After genealogical investigation, they discovered he had a distant relative in the United States. You. Edward blinked, visibly surprised. Me? How so? From what I understand, your paternal great-grandmother was Hungarian and a second cousin to this Endre Kovac's grandfather. The law office managed to trace the lineage through immigration records and family documents. The atmosphere in the room completely changed. What was previously skepticism transformed into absolute attention. Claude, the commercial director, who moments before was checking emails on his cell phone, now looked fixedly at Logan. And how much? Edward cleared his throat, trying to maintain composure. And how much would this inheritance be? Logan consulted his notes. The amount mentioned here is approximately 10 million euros, in addition to properties in Budapest and in the Lake Balaton region. A murmur ran through the room. 10 million euros was an amount that would transform any life, even that of a successful CEO like Edward. There must be some mistake, said Edward, his voice betraying his agitation. This can't be right. The document seems very official, replied Logan, leafing through the pages. It has Hungarian government stamps, certified signatures, legal process numbers. It doesn't seem to be a mistake or a fraud. Vanessa, the financial director, who until then had been observing everything with professional caution, intervened. We need to properly verify this. Perhaps we should hire a professional translator to confirm. Edward quickly agreed. Yes, of course, we need to be absolutely certain before... His speech was interrupted when Logan turned to the last page of the document and his face paled. Mr. Brandon, there's something here that I think you need to know immediately. What? What does it say? There's a legal deadline to respond to this notification. You need to formally confirm that you accept starting the inheritance claim process, or it will be reverted to the Hungarian state. And what is this deadline? Asked Edward, leaning even further forward. Logan swallowed hard. Today. The response must be sent by the end of the business day today, in Budapest time. Considering the time zone difference, that means that we have only a few hours, completed Edward, rising abruptly. This is madness. How do they expect me to respond to something like this in such a short time? They probably tried to contact you before, suggested Logan, still examining the document. Here it mentions previous attempts at communication via email and phone calls. Edward ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of dishevelment. Renee, check my email inbox for the past few months. Look for anything from Hungary, and you, he pointed to Logan, are you absolutely sure about this deadline? Yes, sir, confirmed Logan. "It's very clear here. Hungarian succession law establishes specific deadlines for these cases, especially when involving foreigners." The room entered crisis mode. Employees were running to check emails, make calls, search for information online about Hungarian inheritance laws. Edward alternated between states of excitement and disbelief, while Martha observed everything from her corner, a mixture of pride and apprehension in her gaze. Amid the growing chaos, Patricia, the receptionist, entered the room with a middle-aged man. "Mr. Brandon, this is Maurice Ferreira, the translator we managed to contact. He has experience with Slavic languages." The translator approached the table, greeting everyone with a professional nod. Edward quickly explained the situation and asked him to examine the document to confirm the initial translation made by Logan. Maurice adjusted his glasses and began to leaf through the pages, occasionally consulting an electronic dictionary. After a few minutes, he looked up, surprise evident on his face. "Well, I don't speak Hungarian fluently," he began, "but I know enough to identify official documents." And the young man is correct. This is, without a doubt, a formal inheritance notification. A collective sigh ran through the room. The professional confirmation validated what Logan had said, making that surreal situation even more concrete. "As for the mentioned amount," continued the translator, locating a specific paragraph, "yes, it really talks about 10 million euros, in addition to real estate." Edward let himself fall into his chair, the impact of the news finally settling. For a moment, he seemed to have completely forgotten where he was and who surrounded him. His eyes stared at a distant point, his mind calculating the implications of that unexpected fortune. "And the deadline?" he finally asked, returning to reality. "Confirm the deadline for response." Maurice located the information and frowned. "Yes, unfortunately, the deadline is today. Considering the time zone, we have approximately 4 hours. The confirmation provoked a new wave of agitation. Edward turned to Logan, who remained seated calmly, still making notes in his notebook. "How did you do this?" he asked, a mixture of admiration and distrust in his voice. "How did a boy your age learn Hungarian to the point of translating a complex legal document?" The question made all eyes turn to Logan again. Martha took a step forward, as if wanting to protect her son from a possible attack. Logan slowly closed his notebook before responding. "I've always had an ease with languages, sir, since childhood. When I got access to the internet, I started studying on my own. Then I got a partial scholarship for an online course. I dedicated every free minute I had to studying." The atmosphere in the meeting room had completely transformed. What had begun as an almost comical situation, the janitor's son claiming to know an exotic language, now revealed itself as a decisive moment in the lives of all present. Edward Brandon, always so sure of himself, seemed momentarily vulnerable, as if the power structures that sustained him had suddenly been shaken. "We need to act quickly," said Edward, regaining his composure. "Renee, contact our legal department. We need someone who understands international law." As the employees mobilized, Edward turned his attention to Logan. There was something different in his look, no longer condescension or disbelief, but genuine interest, perhaps even a new respect. "Can you translate the rest of the document? We need to know exactly what they expect as a response." Logan nodded. "I can continue the translation, but could I use a computer? It would facilitate the work to have access to some specific online resources for legal terms." "Of course," Edward promptly replied. "Renee, arrange a computer for—" "What's your full name again?" "Logan Reynolds," the young man answered. "For Logan," completed Edward, with a formality he hadn't demonstrated previously. Martha observed the scene with a mixture of emotions. Pride for her son, of course, but also apprehension. She knew that corporate environment well, and how people could be cruel when their interests were at stake. Logan was being useful now, but afterwards? Would he be discarded as she herself had been so many times? In a few minutes, Logan was installed at a workstation in the marketing department, with access to high-speed internet, a luxury he wasn't accustomed to. His fingers moved agilely over the keyboard, alternating between the physical document and different online linguistic resources. Occasionally, he made notes in his personal notebook, creating his own translation system. Edward circulated around the room, anxious, dividing himself between phone calls and consultations on Logan's progress. Other executives did the same, in a tense dance of expectation. Vanessa, the financial director, seemed especially interested, observing the young man's work with an analytical look. "Did you always know your son had this talent?" she asked Martha, who remained close to Logan, like a silent guardian. The question caught Martha by surprise. It was rare for someone from management to address her, especially about personal matters. "I always knew he was special," she responded with simplicity. "Since he was little, he learned everything very quickly. He asked questions I couldn't always answer." Vanessa nodded, thoughtful. "Is he in college?" Martha hesitated, a slight blush tinging her cheeks. "Not yet. We're saving money for that." The conversation was interrupted when Logan called everyone's attention. "I've completed the translation of the main parts," he announced. "Can I summarize what I found?" In seconds, everyone was gathered around him again. Logan, realizing the weight of that moment, took a deep breath before beginning. "The document confirms everything we've already identified. Endre Kovacs, a Hungarian businessman without direct heirs, died leaving a considerable fortune. After genealogical investigation, the law firm Feher and Szabo located Mr. Brandon as a distant relative and legitimate heir. "And what do we need to do exactly?" asked Edward, leaning over the table. "To start the claim process, you need to send a formal letter in Hungarian, confirming your interest and identity. They attached a template that must be filled out and signed. They also request copies of personal documents that prove your lineage, birth certificate, your parents' documents, and, if possible, your grandparents." "That's impossible," exclaimed Edward. "How am I going to get all these documents in just a few hours? And how am I going to write a letter in Hungarian?" The panic was palpable in his voice. For the first time, the powerful CEO seemed completely helpless. It was then that Logan did something unexpected. Calmly, he opened his notebook to a blank page and began to write. "I can draft the letter for you," he said without raising his eyes. "I know the appropriate format for formal correspondence in Hungarian. As for the documents, the template suggests that, in case of urgency, it's possible to send what you have available now and complement later with the rest." The room fell silent, everyone observing that 18-year-old young man take control of the situation with a competence that no one there would have expected. "You would do that?" asked Edward, the surprise evident in his voice. Logan finally raised his gaze. "Yes, sir, I can do it." In the following minutes, an unlikely cooperation was established. Edward provided copies of his personal documents, while Logan worked on drafting the formal letter. Renee activated the legal department, which sent a lawyer to accompany the process. Everyone was working against the clock, aware of the approaching deadline. At one point, Edward stepped away for a private call. When he returned, his countenance had changed. He approached Logan with a grave expression. "I managed to speak with my mother," he said. "She confirmed that my great-grandmother was indeed Hungarian, Isabel Kovacs. She came to the United States as a child with her parents. I always thought they were exaggerated family stories, but it seems they were true." The confirmation added a new layer of reality to that extraordinary situation. It wasn't just a strange document, but a genuine connection to an almost forgotten past. 2 hours later, the letter was ready, the documents organized, and everything prepared for sending. The law office had provided a specific email address for the response, as well as a number for contact via video call. "It's time," announced Edward, checking the clock. "Let's send it and hope it works." Before the message was sent, however, he hesitated. His gaze turned to Logan, who was observing everything with a tranquil expression. "Thank you," said Edward, the words sounding almost strange on his lips, accustomed to giving orders, not expressing gratitude. "Without you, I would have lost this opportunity." Logan nodded, a small smile forming on his face. "I'm happy to have helped, sir." The email was sent. The response came almost immediately. An automatic confirmation of receipt, followed by a message from the Hungarian lawyer himself, requesting a video call for preliminary identity verification. In minutes, the meeting room transformed into an international communication center. On the large screen, the elegant figure of Ferenc Feher, senior lawyer of the Feher and Szabo office, greeted everyone in formal English. Edward introduced himself, displaying his documents as requested. The conversation flowed with difficulty due to the language barrier until Logan, discreetly positioned outside the camera's range, passed Edward a note with a phrase in Hungarian. Edward, after a moment of hesitation, read the words with hesitant pronunciation. The effect was immediate. The Hungarian lawyer smiled widely and responded enthusiastically in his native language. Edward looked at Logan, lost. "He's saying he's happy to see that you have an interest in Hungarian culture," Logan quickly translated. "This will make the process much easier." Edward made a gesture for Logan to approach. "This is Logan Reynolds," he introduced, surprising everyone with the gesture. "He is my assistant for Hungarian matters." The improvised promotion caused surprised looks among the employees. Martha, from her corner, observed everything with wide eyes. Logan greeted the lawyer in fluent Hungarian, briefly explaining the situation. The conversation between the two continued for a few minutes, to the astonishment of everyone in the room. "What is he saying?" asked Edward, anxious. "He confirmed that you have been identified as a legitimate heir," explained Logan. "Our response arrived within the legal deadline. Now the formal process of transferring the inheritance begins, which may take a few months, but the most urgent part is resolved." A collective sigh of relief ran through the room. Edward let himself fall into his chair, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. After a few more minutes of conversation, the video call was ended with promises of new contacts in the coming days. When the screen went black, a surreal silence took over the room. Everyone seemed to be processing what had just happened. It was Edward who broke the silence. "Well, it seems I owe you more than a thank you," he said, addressing Logan. Then, with a half-smile, he added, "In fact, it seems I owe you exactly one salary." The words reminded everyone of the promise made hours before, when the document was still just an irritating mystery. Edward's impulsive offer to give his monthly salary to whoever translated that garbage now came back to haunt him. Logan blushed. "Sir, I didn't do it for the money. I just wanted to help." "It doesn't matter why you did it," replied Edward. "A promise is a promise, especially when made in front of witnesses." Curious glances crossed the room. Everyone knew that Edward's monthly salary was a considerable amount, enough to significantly change the life of someone like Logan. "Actually," continued Edward thoughtfully, "considering the value of the inheritance you helped me secure, one salary seems even a bit small." Martha stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mr. Brandon, we don't need—" "Mom," Logan gently interrupted. "Please." Edward observed the interaction between mother and son with a thoughtful expression. Something seemed to change in his gaze, a new understanding, perhaps, about people who until then were invisible to him. "Logan," he finally said, "today you demonstrated an extraordinary talent, a talent that, frankly, was being wasted. And that makes me think about how many other talents we're wasting through sheer lack of attention." The room was in complete silence now, everyone attentive to the CEO's words. "I'm going to fulfill my promise, of course," he continued, "but I want to propose something more, something that might make more difference in the long run. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue." The air in the meeting room seemed dense with expectation. Edward Brandon, the man who hours before barely noticed the existence of people like Martha and Logan, now looked at them with a disconcerting intensity. His expression had changed. It was no longer that of the arrogant executive, but of someone who had just had an epiphany. "Vanessa," he called, turning to the financial director, "how much do we invest annually in talent development programs?" The unexpected question made Vanessa quickly consult some notes on her tablet. "About $300,000, considering corporate scholarships and training programs." Edward nodded, thoughtful. "And how much do we invest in the search for external talent? Headhunters, selection processes, adaptation of new employees?" "In the last fiscal year, approximately $1,200,000, she replied, intrigued by the direction of the conversation. $1,200,000, repeated Edward, as if testing the weight of the words. "And yet we almost lost 10 million euros today because no one here spoke Hungarian. Meanwhile, we had a language specialist practically under our noses, invisible to all of us." The comment provoked an embarrassed silence. Some executives lowered their eyes, others pretended to check their cell phones. The truth in Edward's words was undeniable and uncomfortable. "Logan," he continued, turning to the young man, Besides Hungarian, what other languages do you know? Logan hesitated, unaccustomed to being the center of attention. English and Spanish at an advanced level. I have intermediate knowledge of Polish and a bit of German. I'm also starting to study Mandarin. Impressed murmurs ran through the room. Edward shook his head, between admired and incredulous. And you learned all this by yourself? Without language schools, without exchange programs? Yes, sir. I use free online resources, apps, and participate in virtual conversation groups. The public library has a good section of books in other languages, too. Edward exchanged a significant look with Vanessa before continuing. You're in your last year of high school, right? Do you have plans for college? The question made Martha move uncomfortably in her corner. Logan cast a brief glance at his mother before responding. I've been studying for the SAT. I hope to get a spot in languages or linguistics, preferably at a state university. And if I offered you an alternative? Asked Edward, leaning forward. A full scholarship at any university in the country, with all costs covered. Tuition, materials, transportation, food, everything. The shock was visible on the faces of Logan and Martha. She put her hand to her mouth, while the young man seemed momentarily speechless. Why? Was all he managed to ask. The simple question seemed to catch Edward by surprise. He expected immediate gratitude, perhaps even tears of emotion, not a direct questioning of his motivations. Because you have an extraordinary talent, he replied after a brief pause. A talent that deserves to be developed, and because today you helped me in a way I could never have imagined. But Logan didn't seem convinced. There was a maturity in his gaze that went far beyond his 18 years, the result perhaps of a life where nothing had come easily. And only I would have this opportunity? He asked, his voice calm but firm. What would happen to other talented young people, children of employees like my mother whom you don't even know exist? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Edward blinked, momentarily disconcerted. He wasn't used to having his offers questioned, especially by someone in Logan's social position. Martha stepped forward, her face pale. Logan, don't be ungrateful. Mr. Brandon is offering a wonderful opportunity. I'm not being ungrateful, Mom, Logan replied gently. I'm just trying to understand. Turning to Edward, he continued, You promised your monthly salary to whoever translated the document. I translated it. If you want to keep your promise, great. We'll use the money to improve our situation, but I don't want to be treated as a charity case just because I suddenly became useful. The silence that followed was dense. Edward looked at Logan with an expression difficult to decipher. Surprise, respect, perhaps even a touch of embarrassment. It was Vanessa who broke the impasse. Logan is right, she said, to everyone's astonishment. We're talking about a specific person when we should be discussing a systemic problem. Edward frowned, turning to her. What are you suggesting? A scholarship program, Vanessa promptly replied. Not just for Logan, but for children of all employees in the operational base. A structured program with clear criteria and equal opportunities. The suggestion made Edward slightly recline in his chair, clearly calculating the costs and implications. His expression went from initial surprise to something more contemplative. A scholarship program, he repeated slowly, for internal talent development. Glances crossed the room. Some executives seemed intrigued by the idea, others visibly uncomfortable. That would cost much more than an individual scholarship, commented Claude, always attentive to numbers. Yes, agreed Edward, surprising everyone, but it would also bring much greater returns in the long run. Turning to Logan, he continued, You just proved that there are extraordinary talents being wasted right under our noses. Talents that could be generating value for the company instead of being ignored. Logan maintained a neutral expression, but his eyes shone with intensity. It's not just about value for the company, Mr. Brandon. It's about opportunities, about seeing people as human beings, not as functions. The simple words, said without aggression, but with absolute conviction, seemed to hit Edward like a physical blow. For a moment, he just stared at the young man, as if truly seeing him for the first time. You're right, he finally said, his voice lower. It's exactly about that. Turning to the gathered executives, Edward assumed his leadership tone again. I want a complete project for a scholarship and professional development program. Beneficiaries, children of operational and base administrative employees. Initial budget, the equivalent of 1 year of my salary. The statement provoked a wave of surprised murmurs. Edward Brandon, known for his fierce resistance to investments that didn't bring immediate returns, was committing a significant amount from his own pocket. "And I want Logan Reynolds on the committee that will structure this program," he added to general astonishment. "He has a perspective that we clearly lack." Martha observed everything with contained tears in her eyes. In 2 years working at the company, she had never witnessed such a sudden transformation, not just in circumstances, but in people she considered immutable in their arrogance and indifference. Logan, for his part, maintained a surprising composure. "I accept participating in the committee," he said calmly, "but I still need to finish high school, and my mother still needs me to help at home." Edward nodded. "Of course. We'll organize everything so that you can reconcile your responsibilities." Then, looking at Martha, he added, "And as for you, Mrs. Reynolds, would you like to consider a change of position in the company?" The question caught her completely off guard. "What do you mean, sir?" "Our human resources team needs someone who knows the employees at the operational base, someone who can be a bridge between the different hierarchical levels, someone people trust and respect. From what I've seen today, you have an extraordinary son, and that says a lot about how you raised and educated him, even in difficult circumstances." Martha seemed speechless. The idea of leaving the cleaning functions, of having a position where she would be heard and respected, seemed so distant from her reality that she could barely process it. I don't have training for that," she finally managed to say. "Training can be acquired," Edward replied firmly. "Character and integrity are much rarer and more valuable, and from what I see, you have both in abundance." The next few hours passed like a whirlwind. Meetings were scheduled, documents drafted, commitments made. The Hungarian law office sent new correspondence, confirming receipt of the response and detailing the next steps in the inheritance process. Edward, now with Logan's direct help, promptly responded, establishing a communication channel that would be vital in the following months. At the end of that extraordinary day, as the sun set over Austin, Martha and Logan left the Tech Vista Corp building side by side, not as the janitor and her son, but as people whose value had finally been recognized. "Are you okay, Mom?" asked Logan, noticing Martha's reflective silence. She smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "I'm trying to understand how all this happened. This morning, I was invisible to those people. Now they finally saw you," completed Logan. "As I've always seen you." Martha squeezed her son's hand affectionately. "You've always been my pride, Logan, since you were little. But today you made me feel that every sacrifice was worth it." As they walked to the bus stop, Martha reflected on how life could change in a single day, on how doors could open when you least expected, on how sometimes being seen, really seen, was the first step to transforming not just your own story, but that of everyone around you. In the window of the top floor of the Tech Vista Corp building, Edward Brandon observed the pair moving away. In his hands, the Hungarian document that had changed not only his financial situation, but his perspective on the people around him. People who, until that morning, were just functions, not individuals with stories, talents, and potential. Perhaps, he thought, the true inheritance of that day wasn't the millions of euros, but the valuable lesson about seeing beyond appearances, about valuing what really matters, about how arrogance can cost much more than money. It can cost opportunities, connections, and growth. With that thought, he turned to his desk, where a new task awaited him, drafting the fundamental principles of the Tech Vista Corp Talent Development Program. A program that, without him knowing yet, would transform not just his company, but would become a model for the American corporate sector in the following years. 6 months passed since that afternoon that changed the course of so many lives. Tech Vista Corp, previously known only as a promising technology company, was now gaining prominence in the specialized media for a different initiative, its revolutionary internal talent development program. The official launch ceremony of the program was happening in the company's main auditorium, completely packed. Employees from all hierarchical levels mingled with journalists, representatives from other companies, and local authorities. On the stage, Edward Brandon awaited the moment to make his speech, accompanied by Vanessa, Martha, and, of course, Logan. "I never imagined I would be here," whispered Martha to her son, nervously adjusting the blazer of her new corporate uniform. As coordinator of integration and well-being, she now wore formal clothes, no longer the light blue uniform of the cleaning team. Logan smiled at his mother with pride. "You always deserved to be here, Mom. You just needed the right opportunity." Edward approached the microphone, and the buzz in the audience gradually diminished until complete silence. His countenance had changed in the last few months. He still maintained his characteristic confidence, but there was something new in his eyes, a humility that didn't exist before. "Good morning, everyone. We are here to officially celebrate the launch of the New Horizons program, an initiative that represents much more than just corporate social responsibility or human resources development. This program represents a fundamental change in how we see value, potential, and above all, people." Edward paused, his gaze scanning the auditorium before continuing. 6 months ago, I almost lost something extremely valuable because of a failure that wasn't technical or strategic, but human. A failure of perception, an inability to see beyond titles, positions, and functions. A blindness that I'm sure isn't exclusive to me or this company. Murmurs of agreement ran through the audience. Several executives present exchanged significant looks, recognizing the same problem in themselves. That day, I discovered that the son of an employee from our cleaning team spoke fluent Hungarian, a language that no one here mastered and that proved crucial for an international business opportunity. More than that, I discovered that this extraordinary young man had learned not just Hungarian but several other languages, completely on his own, using limited resources and demonstrating impressive determination. Edward pointed to Logan, who smiled timidly at the mention. Several gazes turned to him, some curious, others admiring. Logan Reynolds taught me a valuable lesson that day, not just about the value of language knowledge in a globalized world, but about how we are constantly surrounded by extraordinary talents that we simply don't see because we don't look in the right direction. The CEO made another pause, a slight smile forming on his lips. "You've all heard the rumors, of course. Yes, thanks to Logan's translation, I secured a significant inheritance from a distant relative in Hungary. The legal process is almost complete, and soon I'll have access to resources that will change my personal life. But the true inheritance of that day was the understanding that we were wasting our most valuable resource, the human potential around us." Edward then formally presented the New Horizons program, an ambitious initiative that offered full scholarships for children of operational employees, professional qualification programs for all hierarchical levels, and a revolutionary internal mobility system that allowed talents to be identified and developed regardless of their initial position in the company. "The program has 3 fundamental pillars," he explained: education, opportunity, and recognition. Because it's not enough to offer knowledge if we don't create spaces for it to be applied, and it's not enough to create opportunities if we don't properly recognize and value each person's contributions. While Edward detailed the technical aspects of the program, Martha observed the auditorium with a mixture of emotions. Her gaze paused for a moment on Josephine, her former colleague from the cleaning team, who smiled radiantly in the front row. Her son, Matthew, would be one of the first beneficiaries of the program. A 16-year-old boy with exceptional talent for mathematics, who would now have the chance to develop his full potential. "And to coordinate this program," continued Edward, "we created a special committee led by Vanessa Mendez, our financial director, and composed of representatives from all hierarchical levels of the company. A committee that includes, with great pride, Martha Reynolds, our new coordinator of integration and well-being, and her son Logan, who acts as a special consultant while completing his studies." Enthusiastic applause filled the auditorium. Martha felt tears threatening to fall, but she breathed deeply, maintaining her composure. This was no longer the moment to cry, but to celebrate a victory conquered with dignity. After the ceremony, a cocktail reception was served in the company's main lobby. Logan conversed animatedly with other young people who, like him, were part of the first class of program scholars. Among them was Frank, his younger brother, who had finally found his own path by demonstrating talent for programming. "Son." Logan turned upon hearing the familiar voice. Anthony, his father, approached with a shy smile. In the last few months, with the change in the family's financial situation and the new job he had gotten as a maintenance technician at Tech Vista Corp itself, another indirect consequence of that transformative day, Anthony was slowly beginning to recover his self-esteem and his place in the family. "Dad, I'm glad you came," said Logan, hugging him sincerely. "I wouldn't miss it for anything," replied Anthony, looking proudly at his son. "Your mother told me you received an offer to work in the international department when you finish high school." Logan nodded. "Yes, part-time, so I can balance it with college. I'll help with negotiations with Eastern European companies." In another corner of the lobby, Edward was talking with a group of businessmen interested in implementing similar programs in their own organizations. The New Horizons had attracted considerable attention from the specialized media, transforming Tech Vista Corp into a case study on innovation in people management. "The return on investment is already visible," explained Edward. "In just 6 months, we identified talents that were completely underutilized. Our staff turnover has dropped dramatically, and engagement has increased in all departments." "And what about the costs?" asked one of the businessmen, clearly skeptical. "A program of this magnitude must represent a significant financial commitment." Edward smiled. "Without a doubt. But let me ask you, what is the cost of not seeing the potential around you? What is the cost of losing opportunities simply because you didn't look at the right people?" Making a dramatic pause, he added, "In my case, it was almost 10 million euros. Martha observed the scene from afar, a small smile on her lips. She had never imagined that her life would change so drastically. Not just her financial situation, which had improved considerably with the new position and the fulfillment of Edward's promise. He had indeed paid Logan the equivalent of his monthly salary, but mainly her social position, her sense of self-worth. In her new function, Martha had discovered herself naturally talented at dealing with people, mediating conflicts, identifying unexpressed needs, qualities she had always had, but that had never been valued in her old position. Now employees from all levels sought her out, trusted her, respected her opinion. "A penny for your thoughts," said Vanessa, approaching with 2 champagne flutes, offering one to Martha. "I was just reflecting on how everything changed," replied Martha, accepting the drink. "Sometimes I still wake up thinking it was all a dream." Vanessa smiled. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't raised such an extraordinary son. The merit is all yours." "The merit is Logan's," Martha gently corrected. "He always had this light inside him, even when everything around us seemed dark." The 2 women observed Logan, who was now surrounded by a group of young interns, explaining something enthusiastically. His initial shyness had given way to a calm confidence, the fruit of genuine recognition of his value. "He's going far," commented Vanessa. "All of them are," replied Martha, her gaze encompassing the various young people present at the ceremony. Children of janitors, security guards, receptionists, maintenance technicians. Young people who, until a few months ago, were invisible to the corporate world. It's just a matter of opportunity. In the center of the lobby, Edward raised his glass, asking for everyone's attention for a toast. "To the New Horizons program," he announced, "and to all those who remind us daily that the true value of a company is not in its products or services, but in the people who compose it." All of them. Glasses were raised throughout the lobby. Logan sought his mother's gaze across the crowd, and for a moment they communicated silently as they always had. A communication that went beyond words, laden with shared history, struggles, and now achievements. 2 months later, at the first evaluation meeting of the program, the preliminary results surprised even the most optimistic. Not only did the benefited young people demonstrate exceptional performance in their studies, but the organizational climate of the company had changed dramatically. Employees at all levels reported greater satisfaction and engagement. "We've created something truly transformative here," commented Edward, observing the graphs presented by Vanessa, "something that goes far beyond numbers and statistics." Logan, who participated in the meeting as a consultant, nodded, because in the end, it's not just about scholarships or career opportunities, it's about dignity, about being seen, about having your humanity recognized and valued. Edward looked at the young man with new respect. In just 6 months, Logan had grown not only in confidence, but in articulation and presence. The same intelligence that before was silently applied to solitary studies now found expression in ideas and projects that benefited dozens of people. "You're absolutely right," agreed Edward, "and that's a lesson I will never forget." When the meeting ended, Logan met with Martha at the company cafe. She had just come from a mentoring session with new employees from the cleaning team. Part of her function was to ensure that everyone, regardless of position, understood the opportunities available to them and their families. "How was it?" he asked, sitting next to his mother. "Amazing," Martha replied, her eyes shining. "Two of them are already considering going back to school. One wants to study education, the other business administration. They're talented women, Logan, who simply never had a chance." Logan smiled, recognizing in his mother's enthusiasm the same feeling that motivated him every day. The certainty that small changes, when implemented with sincerity and commitment, could trigger profound transformations. "You know what I think sometimes," he said, looking out the window at the Austin skyline, where the sun was beginning to set behind the hills. "I think about how many stories like ours exist out there, how many wasted talents, how many silenced voices, simply because someone decided that certain people don't deserve to be seen or heard." Martha held her son's hand affectionately. "That's why what we're doing here is so important, because each life we transform becomes an example for other companies, other communities." Logan nodded, thoughtful. "A domino effect of possibilities." "Exactly," agreed Martha. "And it all started with you having the courage to step forward that day." Logan smiled, knowing it wasn't just courage, but also his mother's unconditional support. Education based on solid values, unwavering belief in his potential, even when the world seemed determined to limit his horizons. Together, mother and son observed the sunset over the city, aware that they had not only transformed their own lives, but initiated a change that would continue far beyond them. A change based on the simple but revolutionary idea that each person deserves to be seen not just for what they do, but for who they really are. On the horizon, the city lights began to turn on, one by one, like possibilities illuminating in the darkness. Possibilities that, as they had learned, had always been there. It just took someone having the courage to see them.